think we'll get started. So I guess maybe Kevin, take it away.
Sure thing. Okay, thank you everybody for who's watching live and anyone watching after. We're excited to update you and keep you in the know with what's the very latest in our ongoing campaign, not just for Happy, but our work to establish legal rights for non-human animals throughout the United States and around the world. So we have some exciting news to share on that front today, but regarding Kavan, many of you may be familiar with the elephant Kavan, who just this week arrived at sanctuary in Cambodia. But of course, we're here mostly to talk about what happened in Happy's case. Unfortunately, despite her name, of course, she is still alone at the Bronx Zoo, where she's been for over 40 years. And our litigation to have her finally free to a sanctuary with the right to bodily liberty continues. But we have big updates because last week, as many of you I'm sure are aware, we had oral arguments in her case. Was it last week? I'm losing track of my dates. I think it was actually 2 weeks ago, almost. So Steve's here. Steve, of course, argued the case. Stephen Wise, our founder and president. And I should introduce myself for anyone who doesn't know me. I'm Kevin Schneider. I'm also an attorney and the executive director. Kind of try to keep the lights on here at the Non-Human Rights Project and help where I can on the legal front. And also joining us, of course, is Courtney Fern, our Director of Campaigns and Government Relations, to fill us in on the efforts for Happy and other animals going on outside the courtroom. And you already heard from Mickey Suzuki, our crack development director, at the top there. She's our kind of voice behind the curtain. So as I said, we're going to talk over the next 30 minutes or so to really dig in. I have questions I'm going to be putting to Steve and Courtney about Happy's case and what happens next and how it all fits in the bigger picture with our work and mission. And also we want to take time to answer your questions. So anytime, just pop something into the chat box and we will do our very best to get to it here. And if we can't, we're happy to follow up outside by email or any other means. With all that, let's get into Happy's case and what happened. So it was the First Department is the name of the court. It sits in New York City. It's a mid-level appellate court, like most court systems. In New York, there's the trial court, the intermediate appellate court, and then the high court, which in New York is called the Court of Appeals. And we'll definitely be talking a lot about that because in so many ways, Happy's case, the goal from the very beginning was to get to the Court of Appeals and get them to finally rule and weigh in on this question of whether any animal, an elephant or any other animal, can have the right to bodily liberty or really any truly enforceable legal right. So Steve, we all were very excited about this case, about these arguments. Of course, us lawyers and everyone on the Non-Human Rights Project and followers of ours who have been so invested in this know for months that we were working on our briefs and getting ready for these arguments and talking about the significance of them. Every time we just get to go into court, I think is almost a small victory in itself. But this time it was virtual. So, and I guess the upside of that is we think a lot of people, more people than usual, have gotten to see it because it's on YouTube. We've been sharing the link. We're happy to share that with anyone who's looking for it. So I guess, first of all, what did you feel about the format and how was it, the whole thing? Did you feel that you connected with the judges or did you think the virtual format was too much of a challenge?
This was the first time that I had argued a case on a virtual format. It had its pros and cons. When you're in a courtroom and things are tense, you can actually feel it. Things kind of crackle, or there's an atmosphere there. So of course that really didn't happen because we not only was I sitting in Florida, but each of the judges in New York was sitting separately as well. So we were all separate. So it wasn't quite the same feeling at all. On the other hand, usually, lawyers are kind of below judges, and you look up and they're like on a bench and they're kind of spread out. And so that did not happen. I'm actually looking at all five of the judges for the first time, like face on, so I could I could monitor their facial expressions. Perhaps I could hear them better. I'm not sure how they observed me when I was speaking to them, because I may have been looking at them, and they may have seen me looking away from them because I wasn't staring directly into the camera. It'd be the difference between arguing to the judges now by looking straight to the camera, or going like this because I see a judge kind of in the lower part of the screen and I'm speaking to that judge, but I'm probably looking like I'm not looking at that judge. So I'm not clear, how that works out. And then I guess if I do it again, I'll probably try not to look at the judges, but to look directly into the camera. But the problem is then you can't see the facial expression of the judge, to whom you're speaking.
Yeah. So to put it short, there were some challenges for sure, but like I said, anyone can go on and just watch them. And historically, we've been able to get maybe for really packed cases, we've had sometimes 100 or basically the capacity of whatever the courtroom is. And if folks weren't able to get in, then they just weren't able to see it. The courts have been very prickly about allowing filming or any kind of recording. So this is kind of a new silver lining of sorts in the coronavirus pandemic days. But
Kevin, I looked, and I think there's almost 1,700 views of the argument now on YouTube. So that's way more than I've ever seen any other argument. That's
right. So and I think certainly from my perspective, that's a win in itself, because not only do people get to see, well, how hard it is on poor Steve to have to deal with these judges, but on a broader level, what our court system looks like. I think a lot of people maybe have not been so familiar with it, and so I hope kind of among those 1,700 people, it's been an awakening of a lot of sorts. But on that front, I think people who watched and tuned in, anyone who does tune in and watch the arguments on YouTube, might notice that we're trying to make a very big and bold argument, and the court gave us something like 6 minutes, 8 minutes. How did you feel about that, and what was it like trying to cram so much argument into such a short time?
I didn't like it very much. We each side had requested how much time we wanted, up to 15 minutes. So in this case, both of us had requested 15 minutes. And the last time we were in front of them in 2017, we had each argued for 15 minutes. So I worked for 3 weeks, reading everything, having my desk piled up high, and trying to put together an argument that, if no one asked me any questions, it would last 15 minutes, and then it could be less as well. When you're arguing in front of a court, you don't know whether you're facing a cold bench and that the judges just sit there and look at you and never ask you a question, or a hot bench, which is when they pepper you with questions, from the word go. I'd say I had a pretty hot bench, at least once they got warmed up. But I was prepared to make kind of a step-by-step argument. And they only 48 hours before the argument, they sent us an email saying, by the way, you get 4 minutes to argue and 2 minutes to respond. And that made it very difficult. It's hard to argue that, for the first time in 2,000 years, a non-human animal should have rights in 4 minutes. You can't. And then, of course, as those of you who saw, I think I spoke for about a minute and a half, and then all of a sudden they started asking questions, and the questions oftentimes could have used a much lengthier response than I was able to give, because it appeared to us that some of the judges, as I think I said to one of them, did not quite understand what it was we were arguing, and it's really hard to set a judge straight in 10 seconds as opposed to having 10 minutes. So we were not happy with that, and it's something that in all my years of practicing law I'd never encountered. No one had ever said, okay, 48 hours before or any time before, okay, you have 4 minutes to argue. That made a difficult situation even more difficult.
Sure, and you mentioned the interesting phrase, hot bench. And again, for anyone who's not familiar with that just means when you have a group of judges who are very active and asking a lot of questions. And that certainly was the case with us. What did you make of their reactions, their facial expressions, their questions? I know they were kind of coming from all over the place, but did you have any sort of general feeling, after the argument?
Yes, the general feeling I had is I wasn't sure that they understood, some of what we were saying, or, for example, or we're able to focus on what the actual issues are. So, for example, we had had an opinion by Justice Tuitt, in the Supreme Court below, which was extremely favorable to us. And except she said that she felt that she couldn't rule in our favor because she was bound by a decision that had come down 6 years before in 2014. And so in our brief, we spent most of our work really kind of going right after that opinion from 2014, showing in great detail how it was wrong and that no rational court should rely upon it. So that's what I was ready to argue, because that's what I thought was the issue that we were arguing. And the court started asking us questions, or asking me questions that didn't seem to have anything to do with that. I guess there were one of them is that they wanted to know why we shouldn't go to the legislature, and that's not really that's not really a ground for denying the case or affirming the case. And maybe they think that we should go there, but as I was trying to explain to them in the 8 seconds that I had to do that, that we had brought what's called a common law. We're seeking a common law writ of habeas corpus on behalf of Happy. That it's common law, which means it's a writ of habeas corpus that is devised by judges and not by legislators. And while the legislature can weigh in, it can pass a statute, that does not take the responsibility away from the judges to make a decision under the common law. So it was kind of a difficult conversation trying to persuade the judges that it was actually their duty to decide the case. And by the way, here's how you should decide it, even if they thought that they wish it would go to the legislature. And I wasn't sure whether I actually was able to persuade, one or more of the judges that as a common law judge, it's their duty to make the common law.
Yeah, I'm really glad that you brought up that line of questioning about the legislative. Essentially, the judges there, several of them, when we were arguing, said, in a nutshell, this is too complex for us. We're just the court. This is something that really should be in front of a legislature to. And even some of the judges went out of their way to say that they were sympathetic. One in particular, Judge Oing, made that quite clear. So at this point, I want to turn to Courtney and ask, first of all, what do you make of that? And, how do you think that fits into our sort of bigger plans? Because we don't make a secret of the fact that we are interested in legislative proposals that would recognize rights for non-human animals in addition to the courts. But, as Steve said, we have very specific reasons, and we think very good ones, for being in the court now. But Courtney, I was hoping you could shed some light on just your reaction to that line of questioning from the judges, and also where we're going on that front.
Yeah, I just want to say I, of course, agree with everything Steve has said and your analysis as well. I wasn't surprised that they asked a question. I thought that was a question or an issue that would come up, but I was surprised about how many questions they had about this being a legislative matter, and the implications that a ruling like this could have, and why they felt it. They had questions about why we weren't seeking legislative remedy for Happy's imprisonment. But as Steve said, we're seeking to have her freed and declared a legal person, and have her right to bodily liberty recognized through the common law writ of habeas corpus, which is what courts are supposed to do. In terms of legislation, we are working on, my dog is weighing in. We are working on legislation to have the rights of certain non-human animals recognized within specific jurisdictions. I've talked about this previously, starting at the local level and then going larger. But there's no reason why this can't be an issue that's addressed by both the courts and the legislature, being the rights of non-human animals. And every social justice movement that I'm aware of has worked through both the courts and the legislature. So, what we're seeking, the through the common law writ of habeas corpus, that's the responsibility of the courts to decide. So they can't just defer to the legislature to take on this matter. And yeah, so that's my thoughts. And having whether it's a state law, federal resolution, a local ordinance, recognizing the rights of non-human animals has never been done. So we don't know how that's going to go about. And look, and Happy needs immediate relief, which is why the courts are the most appropriate to decide her case.
Right. Well, it's rather strange because say a human being went in front of a court saying that they were being illegally detained, and they were seeking rid of habeas corpus. It's unimaginable that a court would say, well, why don't we go to the legislature rather than making a decision as to whether they were entitled to be freed. So I was a bit surprised. I was also surprised by the line of questioning saying, well, if we give Happy the right to bodily liberty, then doesn't that mean she'll be starting to vote? She'll have to vote, which was again kind of surprising to us, since in our briefs we kind of covered that, and it's obviously obvious that giving Happy or recognizing her right to bodily liberty and allowing her to be freed doesn't have anything to do with voting or any other right. We've encountered this many times, and each time we try to explain that we're seeking the right to bodily liberty protected by a writ of habeas corpus, and that once you achieve that, well, then you can bring a second case or a third case or a fourth case, and it's up to the judges to figure out, how they're going to draw the line at each level. But you just don't say, I'm not going to free you because then you'll be able to vote. It doesn't make any legal sense. So I took that as assuming that I was dealing with a judge who probably had never thought of this before, because as I can't be the only person who has the experience of confronting someone or being confronted by someone who thinks, well, if a non-human animal has a right to bodily liberty, then they're going to vote and they're going to marry your sister or whatever else. And obviously that's not true. We're simply seeking at this point, a single right for a single being. So we're hoping that the judges will be motivated to go back to our briefs where we answered all of those questions.
Great. So on that note, and for folks, we expect that the court will rule on Happy's appeal sometime in the next 2 months. And at that point, we will likely, and unless we get a pleasant surprise and the court decides that Happy is indeed entitled to habeas corpus, our expectation is that we will continue to move the case up and seek appeal from the Court of Appeals, the highest court in New York. And so that's kind of the rough timeline right now. So Steve, I was hoping you could just speak a little bit more on that, what we expect in that process, what we hope to gain from it, and why.
Sure. Well, by the way, we were in front of the First Department in Manhattan. The last time we were in front of them in 2017, they had ruled against us on grounds that when we sought further review in the highest court of New York, the Court of Appeals, the court itself had not taken the case, but kind of historically, one of the Court of Appeals justices, who even today is the only judge of the highest court of any state who has ever opined on the merits of our case, and he said he liked our case. He had told the First Department that he didn't much like the reasons they gave for having us lose, and so we actually didn't want to take Happy's appeal, to the First Department. That's why we filed the case out in Albion, New York, which is near the Canadian border in Rochester, because we could file the case anywhere we wanted. And instead of in the First Department, we wanted to file it in the Fourth Department, which was another appellate court, which had said in a case that it was a commonplace that entities such as corporations and animals can have legal rights. Well, that's where we wanted to be. We wanted to be in that court. So the judge in the small town in that Fourth Department area, way out in Western New York, indeed issued the habeas corpus order, but then moved us to the Bronx, even though we didn't want to be there. although it turns out that Justice Tewitt was a terrific judge to have. But so we really liked being in front of her. And again, she gave, or by the way, she allowed us 13 hours to argue. And so in 13 hours, we were able to persuade her that we were right. And so that's kind of the irony of we do a lot better if we have 13 hours than if we have 4 minutes, because some of these issues are novel, and we're dealing with something that's never happened before. So it can take more than 4 minutes to explain it, and 13 hours is probably kind of right up our alley, and we can do a really good job there. But now, if we win, it'll be up to the Bronx Zoo to decide whether or not they want to seek further review from the Court of Appeals. And in the unlikely event that we don't, then we would then again seek further review from the Court of Appeals, which is again the highest court of New York. And there are two ways that we can get review from the Court of Appeals. One is, if you may have noticed, if you saw the YouTube tape, that there were 5 judges there, and if 2 of the judges are in dissent, then the loser can automatically have an appeal as of right, to the Court of Appeals. But if they don't, then the losing party has to ask the Court of Appeals if they would be so kind as to hear their case, and we feel that we have a reasonable chance of getting the 2 votes that we need to send it up to the Court of Appeals.
Great. And so, as I mentioned before, while the work in the courtrooms and to judges is really has been our primary driving force for years, we are very much into, under Courtney's leadership, expanding into campaigns and looking for ways basically that we can change public opinion around these issues and get elected officials and other people to come out and embrace the idea that, yes, animals other than humans do deserve legal consideration and appropriate legal rights. So on that front, Courtney, I was hoping you could talk a bit about what's happened on a grassroots level for HAPPY, and what is happening, and perhaps most importantly, what folks listening here can do to get involved.
Yeah, definitely. The campaign to free HAPPY and gather support, not only for her freedom, but also to have her right to liberty recognized, and just raising awareness about the issue of non-human animal rights, has been amazing. About a year and a half ago, her campaign went viral thanks to a very compassionate elephant lover and freelance reporter named Yashara Lee, who shared her plight in our work on Twitter. And it got a lot of celebrities involved. It got the New York City Council Speaker Corey Johnson has come out, and he's an ex officio trustee of the Wildlife Conservation Society, which is the organization that owns and manages the Bronx Zoo, to come out and say that he wishes to see HAPPY and the Bronx Zoo's other solitary elephant, Patty, freed to one of the 2 elephant sanctuaries in the United States. And Bill de Blasio also, during a radio interview, said something doesn't feel right about HAPPY being alone at the Bronx Zoo, and gave some other positive statements. And we've gotten tons of New York, and when I say tons, I mean tens of thousands of New Yorkers to sign petitions. There's a change.org petition calling for HAPPY's freedom to a sanctuary that has over 1.3 million people that have signed it. Tens of thousands of people have completed action alerts asking Jim Burhenny and Wildlife Conservation Society. And Jim Burhenny is the president of executive director, of the Bronx Zoo, as well as the leadership of the Wildlife Conservation Society, to free HAPPY to one of the 2 elephant sanctuaries in the United States. And we've had several days of action, both in-person rallies, as well as, since for the past almost year, since we've all been at home, we've done virtual days of action, which people have been so active in, and just raising awareness about HAPPY's plight. And that's what's most important, is just raising awareness and gathering that support, both from New York City residents, as well as elected officials and people of influence, to just put pressure on the Bronx Zoo to do the right thing, because there's nothing preventing them from releasing Happy to a sanctuary. Nothing is stopping them. So they still have the opportunity to do that. And, you know, we're waiting for them to do that. And yeah, sorry. And we can share links to the action alerts if you haven't completed them. And we'll also post them on social media, and they're on our website as well if you would like to take action for Happy.
Great, thank you for that. And kind of want to use that to transition to another area. First, to talk about, some of you may be aware, we are very deep into preparing lawsuits in additional states. So we've been mostly focused in New York for the last, well, since 2013, with the exception of some also working in Connecticut, but Connecticut is another story altogether. That being said, California and Colorado are two places where we expect to file lawsuits for elephants very early in the next year, in 2021, hopefully in the spring. And we've been working with lawyers in other countries, in particular in Israel and India, to do the same thing, to put forward cases very much like Happy's for elephants, to seek to have those legal systems, much like we're trying to do here. Because as Steve was talking about, that's one of the beauties of the common law, at least for our purposes, is that for better or worse, it is largely transferable between many countries in the world. And India and Israel are two examples where habeas corpus and the principles behind habeas corpus are very much, if not identical, very much the same. And so all that's to say that our work for Happy and other non-human animals who we've filed on behalf of, Tommy and Kiko and Hercules and Leo, they have life beyond just their own kind of confines in their own courtrooms. And I think some great evidence of that has come this week for folks who have been following and aware. I mentioned before the case of the elephant Kavan, and he was held at the zoo in Islamabad, Pakistan, for decades, and for the last 14 years or so was alone and living in much the same way that Happy has been living. Really, the parallels between them are rather striking. But earlier this year, there was a historic ruling by the Chief Justice of the Islamabad High Court, also working again with common law principles. It wasn't a habeas corpus case, but it was a case seeking to have basically all of the animals in the Islamabad Zoo sent to sanctuary, or a great many of them, because of just that they weren't being properly cared for. And Kavan in particular was featured very prominently in the suit. And the judge, the chief judge, was clearly very moved by Kavan in particular, as well as many of the other hundreds of animals that were suffering, unfortunately, at the zoo. And he took the quite historic step of ordering, first recognizing that Kavan and other animals have rights, and drawing on his own Islamic faith and citing passages of the Quran in support of this position, which we found very interesting as well, and kind of really did not expect to see. And then very encouragingly for us, the judge cited Happy's case as a premise to say, look, courts around the world are slowly coming around and recognizing that, yes, some animals do deserve at least some basic legal rights. And just this week, Kavan arrived at sanctuary in Cambodia, which I've been seeing videos, and he seems to be adjusting kind of almost immediately. As soon as he got there, he started kind of acclimating himself. And I saw photos of him touching trunks with other elephants, which he hasn't been able to do in almost 15 years. And so we were very concerned, as everyone was, Four Paws and all the other groups. Cher was very involved in pushing Kavan's story for a number of years. And we're fortunate, or I'm sorry, we're happy, very happy that everything went so smoothly, because as you can imagine, moving a male elephant from Pakistan to Cambodia is no small feat. And but I wanted to just give a quote because the judge, the Chief Justice of the Islamabad High Court has remained very invested in this case. We get actually emails from his clerk, his court clerk, who helps him with his papers, his cases, that make it quite clear how moved he was and remains by not just Kavan's case, but our work as well. So it's a kind of shot in the arm for us. Sometimes we feel like we run into someone like, a court like the First Department and think, oh boy, when are these judges kind of going to really see things our way? And then you get a judgment like this, which, cites us specifically. And
Kevin?
Yeah,
I think the judge of the Islamabad High Court also cited all of our chimpanzee cases as well as Happy's case. So
it's nice to know that, judges around the world are not just paying attention, but actually taking what we're doing and putting it to work. And I just wanted to read what he wrote here. He said, Kavan's relocation is symbolic. It is a message for the human race that it is not humane to deprive animal species of their respective natural habitats. It is a declaration that protecting animal species in their respective natural habitats amounts to preventing the extinction of the human species on this planet. So, this judge was not shy at all about taking these big issues, climate change, the way that human beings relate to the planet, and essentially commodify it for our own use. He was not shy at all and continues. It seems like, it's just continuing to add more good language, certainly for us. And so, Steve, what did you think when you heard about this case, and what did you think of reading some of the things that the judge has continued to say?
I was really impressed, really happy to see it. He actually wrote, I guess, 3 decisions, and each one of them has been terrific. There's all kinds of quotations that we are using and will use, and to try to demonstrate to some of our U.S. judges that there are other judges who are in favor of the sorts of things that we're asking them to do. So it was a terrific case, and we hope to see more like it outside the United States, and more within the United States too. Also, Kevin, in the Colombian case involving Chucho the bear, for example, one of the dissenting judges clearly was also impressed by our work, and in his dissent, he was using the language that we use in our cases. So we clearly reached at least one of the Colombian Constitutional Court judges as well. So just kind of take step by step, one by one. Non-human animals have lacked legal rights for 2,000 years, and you don't expect judges to say, "Whoops, we made a mistake. Sorry. All non-human animals will have rights." You have to persuade them, one by one, step by step, and it's happening. It's not happening as quickly as any of us in the Non-Human Rights Project wanted to happen, but it is happening.
Yeah, and you actually gave video testimony, so I guess technically that was maybe the first time you spoke to a court using a video, but the Columbia High Court, I think, clearly was moved by the testimony that you gave. So I think that's one more great indication of the fact that judges are starting to really listen.
Well, just that we were invited to speak to the court in Colombia.
Great. So at that, I think we've covered a lot, and I'm seeing some questions start to filter in. So I want to make sure we leave time for that. But before I ask Mickey to start feeding us some of your great questions, I wanted to just take a second to recognize that today is Giving Tuesday, and we would not be here without the support of folks like you who make what we do possible. And so if you're able to give any amount, or to even just share our info on social media, or encourage others to, we would very much appreciate it. We support it too. And you can, if you want to do that, you can go to our website, nonhumanrights.org/donate, nonhumanrights.org/donate, or you can text to give. So you'll text the word non-human, all one word, to 44321. So it's non-human to 44321, and anything you can give is very appreciated. So with that, Mickey, do you want to give us some questions?
Yes, absolutely. So this is a question for Michael, but I know we've actually been getting this quite a bit. So the question is, how much of a charitable contribution to the Bronx Zoo would it take for them to release Happy?
And I think that's a really important, I'm glad that that came up because it is one that we get pretty often, not just with Happy's case, but with others as well. Basically, why not just buy her freedom? And I think, well, it's a complex question, but Steve, can you just weigh in first about, why we feel the way we do when we get that question?
Well, Happy is a slave of the Bronx Zoo, and there are lots of instances where human slaves have been in the same position. And the question is, when you pay to free a slave, whether human or non-human, what does that do? Does that encourage people to then get more of them? We don't want to be in the business of buying animals. We're trying to decommodify them. We're trying to treat them as beings who are no longer bought and sold. And on the other hand, you have Happy. We want Happy to be free. Behind me are about 300 books on abolitionism and the history of human slavery, and this issue, has come up time and time again, through the history of human slavery, where the issue is, do you buy a slave, or are you thereby reinforcing the system of slavery in doing it? And by the way, that all assumes that the Bronx Zoo is interested in even selling Happy. We certainly have not asked to do that, and I don't know whether they'd be interested in doing that. But it's not something that we feel that we should be involved in. That doesn't mean other people might decide they should do it, but it's not something we would do.
Courtney, do you want to speak to that a bit as well about kind of the bigger picture when it comes to zoos and breeding programs and everything else?
Yeah, I mean, just to add to what Steve said, we wouldn't want to encourage the market for purchasing and selling and non-human animals such as elephants like Happy. And it would just, create a financial incentive not only for the Bronx Zoo, but for other entities that currently imprison and exploit non-human animals. It would just create a market and feed that. And yeah, we wouldn't want to in any way reward, financially reward any zoos for the imprisonment of non-human animals. And they already are profiting off their imprisonment. And as Steve said, their enslavement. They're currently, they imported them from Africa as recently as a decade ago, not the Bronx Zoo, but other zoos. They breed them, and they don't breed them for conservation purposes. They merely breed them to further populate the captive population for them to continue to exploit and profit off of. So we wouldn't want to, feed into that system anymore. Yeah. And also, as Steve touched upon, the Bronx Zoo has indicated, that at least up until this point, they don't want to get rid of Happy. So I don't know how successful any attempts to purchase her freedom would be.
Yeah, I saw another question that's related. I think of, what do we make of the zoo's intransigence? Why won't they just give in and let Happy go to a sanctuary? I think money is certainly relevant for them and profit, but I think on a deeper level, and I don't want to conjecture too much on what's in their heads, but I think they are afraid of what does it mean if we as a zoo acknowledge that even any one species is not appropriate for captivity. I think there's a fear among perhaps a certain segment of the zoo world industry that is very fearful of that, and to the point where they will try to kick zoos out of their trade association if they have the nerve to say send their elephants to sanctuary like the Detroit Zoo did, in recognition of the fact that captivity is just never appropriate for them. And so I think that a lot of it comes down to, I don't want to say a philosophical battle, but I think there is more of that than we might often think of.
I can think of another reason too. When we sue people like when we sue entities like the Bronx Zoo, we like kick their asses up and down the courtroom, inside the courtroom, outside the courtroom. We go after them hammer and tong. We don't make anything up. We don't exaggerate. We simply make public what they're doing and explain why. And so a lot of them end up, they don't want to do anything that we want them to do. So perhaps if we should tell them not to sell Happy, maybe that Happy would be sold the next day. But they don't like us, and they don't like us because we expose what they do and we expose who they are, and we're not shy about it, and we take it very seriously. We go after them hammer and tong, and we'll continue to go after them hammer and tong, unless we have said that we'll stop going after you hammer and tong if you'll move Happy to the sanctuary. That's up to them.
And I think what's important, and I always want to mention this just to make very clear, Steve's absolutely right. We do go after them with everything, but they're lawyers, right? We don't. Sometimes the zoo, I think, tries to paint this in a very misleading light and say that we're somehow attacking their caretakers or saying that they're somehow deficient in the way they run the zoo, which really just misses the whole point. That would be like saying, if you're imprisoned as a human and you want to get out because you've done absolutely nothing wrong, and they come back and say, well, the pillows are pretty soft, and the food's not that bad, and so we would reject that out of hand. And so I think the same kind of thing is at play here. Certainly that's what I've seen. So I see a lot of questions now. So and we've got looks like about 15 minutes. So Mickey, do you want to give us another one?
Yeah, sure. So everyone knows that Cher had a big part to play in Kavan's freedom. And we're getting this question a lot. Mark asks it today. He asks, have you gotten in touch with her? What are we doing there?
I guess I don't know. We all can probably equally answer this as well. If Cher wants, we would love Cher's support. We've certainly applauded and interacted with her and other celebrities who are advocates for elephants and, animal rights and, anything in line with what we're doing. We would love to work with her and any other, person of influence that would like to help support Happy's freedom, as well as, achieving or having the rights of non-human animals recognized and protected. So Cher, please get in touch. We are ready to work with you. And we are so grateful for everything that you did for Kavan. But see, my dog is asking for her assistance as well. But yeah, I mean, we obviously would love to work with anyone, not just celebrities, but anyone that wants to help free Happy. Feel free to get in touch because we'd love to work with you.
Okay, I think that about says it on that.
Okay, so we have another question coming from Facebook from Leslie. She asks, it seems that the thrust of the Bronx Zoo claim is that Happy will not be able to acclimate to freedom and self-determination. Do you think the success of Kavan's transfer might move them at all?
No, that is not true. What they say. One thing that you might want to know is that at the hearings in this case, the Non-Human Rights Project brought in 5 affidavits of really some of the world's greatest elephant experts, and they made it clear that it's okay to move Happy, and that Happy is not happy, and Happy should not be there, And in fact, one of the things that the lower court judge concluded was that they said that the Non-Human Rights Project had been, in her words, extremely persuasive, quote unquote, in persuading her that Happy should not be at the Bronx Zoo. Also, the Wildlife Conservation Society, the Bronx Zoo, they're a $1 billion organization. They have a lot of scientists, and they did not get a single scientist to file an affidavit, either who worked for them or didn't work for them. They didn't get a single scientist to say that it was better for Happy to be at the Bronx Zoo than to be in a sanctuary. And that's because it's not better for Happy to be in the Bronx Zoo than in a sanctuary. And it's one thing for them to simply bring in people who have no idea what they're talking about, don't understand anything about elephants. Just because you run a zoo doesn't mean you know anything about elephants. Even if you take care of elephants, doesn't mean you know anything about elephants. So they can read, they probably know that it's better for Happy to not be in the Bronx Zoo, and they also know that they're not taking care of Happy. They're taking care of her medical needs. It's like she's in the state prison. They feed her 3 times a day, and they give her medical. They treat her problems. They keep her healthy. But as the judge said, they don't know anything about her social needs, her emotional needs, her biological needs. And I think there were 3 other needs too that they don't know anything about. And so they understand that I know they understand that they cannot meet those needs. So it's not like all of a sudden they say, oh, look, Kayvon has been moved, so that means we should try it. We put in front of them probably 5 or 6 or more other situations where elephants had been moved, and they did just fine. So that's not the reason, and I know they don't believe what they say either.
I think that Kayvon's move, it can be added essentially to the pile, so we can continue to push back on this false notion that elephants can't survive going to sanctuary or other non-human animals. Certainly, it has to be managed very carefully. Definitely, things can go wrong, but as a blanket statement to just say, Happy couldn't thrive there because she's been in captivity so long is just false. And I think that hopefully is something we can continue to impress on the judges.
Well, sure. These kinds of folks have kind of an elephant abuse script in which they say, Happy. Well, first of all, the elephant is happy there, and second of all, we take care of the elephant, and third, that the elephant is so incredibly connected to their human keepers that to deprive them of their human keepers would be a tragedy. When the elephants actually don't give a damn about the human keepers, it's kind of like the Stockholm syndrome. There's nobody else there. Happy hasn't had anyone but human keepers for decades. Either she has to have some kind of relationship with them, or she doesn't have any relationships at all. But our experts would say and gave example after example where you moved an elephant in similar situations, and they just and even when they had problems with their keepers, they immediately began to flourish, and they began to become elephants. And I think we saw that. We're seeing that with Kayvon. Right now, Kayvon, immediately seems to. He's not kind of hiding in a corner or anything. He's out there, rubbing trunks with another elephant. And I can't pretend that I'm not an elephant psychologist, but. I suspect, based upon what all of our experts say and what none of their experts say, since they didn't have any experts on that once Happy is moved, her life will change for the better forever.
I just want to add to everything there. The zoo is sort of creating a narrative to fit, or creating facts to fit their own narrative. One of the things they frequently say is Happy doesn't get along with elephants, but this is despite her living with elephants for most of her captivity. It was only up until 14 years ago, which is a significant period of time that she's lived alone. But she gets along with other elephants. For them to, I know one of the questions too is insinuating that Happy couldn't adapt to freedom is quite ridiculous. I mean, she's a wild-born elephant, and to say that an elephant wouldn't know how to be an elephant and live like an elephant is just absurd. So there's no reason for her
Right.
not to be free.
Courtney, also, elephants are like human beings. I mean, there are a lot of human beings that you could put me in a room with for 40 years. I still wouldn't like them, and they might not like me. That's one of the things of being in a sanctuary with a lot of elephants, is that they can choose their friends. They can choose their enemies. They can choose to be by themselves. And it's that freedom of choice that Happy's been completely deprived of.
Yeah, and this is a really good follow-up question, I think, from Katie. So she says, in the arguments, it seemed like the judges didn't question those arguing for the Bronx Zoo, and it seemed like they accepted their claim that Happy's welfare was fine. So she says, I wonder if that normally happens and why they would seemingly be willing to accept the Bronx Zoo claims at face value.
I don't think they did. Not only that, they're not allowed to. The lower court judge made findings of fact that that went against them. And so the appellate court just simply can't take the lawyer for the Bronx Zoo's word for things. They have to look to see what the findings of fact were below. The judge didn't make any findings of fact that were in favor of the Bronx Zoo. She basically adopted our arguments, and she says Happy, and one of them being Happy should not be in the Bronx Zoo. She should be in a sanctuary, and the judges really have to accept that. And again, it's part of the sequela of the fact that we had 5 of the best elephant experts in the world explain why that was true. The Bronx Zoo didn't put any experts in who knew anything about elephants, and so the court cannot accept it. I don't know why they didn't ask them any questions. It wasn't because they accepted it, accepted what they were saying. In fact, most of what they were saying was kind of silly. If I'd had 50 minutes, I would have kind of taken it apart, sentence by sentence, but I didn't have that. So I wasn't able to even point out to the court that just almost every single thing they said was wrong. But it's in our brief, and if they look closely at our briefs, they'll see it. And it's also in the decision of the lower court. She made certain findings of fact, and the only time that they can be overturned is if she's clearly wrong. And there's no, she wasn't clearly wrong, and there's no evidence that would support the opposite, which is that, hey, being in the Bronx Zoo is good for Happy. There wasn't any at all.
I think sometimes, even somewhat counterintuitively, there are definitely times when, just getting a lot of questions from a panel of judges can make it feel like they were almost weighed against us, or they kind of bought the zoo's arguments more than ours because they didn't question it. Not to go out on a limb and predict that they're going to do something very big for us, this particular court, but I think there's something to be said for the fact that, sometimes when judges are asking a lot of questions, it's because they actually see some merit to what you're saying, but they want to kind of test the boundaries of it or push it a little further. And so it's just kind of one more example of how hard it is to guess what judges are going to do based on, frankly, anything, even the kind of questions that they ask.
Well, I was talking about a cold bench and a hot bench. We lawyers don't want cold benches. We don't want the judges not to ask us any questions because we won't know what's bothering them. So I really appreciate being in front of a hot bench where the judges fire questions at me, because it gives me the chance to get an insight into what problems they might be having with our case, and it gives me a chance to answer it. It'd be nicer if they gave me more than 4 minutes to do it, or more than 6 minutes to do it. But at least I got some opportunity, which would have been better than none. If they hadn't asked me any questions, then I would have been really worried.
And so much of this happens on the papers, so I don't want folks to leave here thinking that this small amount of time, relatively short argument, is necessarily any kind of reflection on what the judges think or what they might do. I know from our experience that it's often been the judges' clerks who look the most carefully at our papers. Judges, they get stacks this high for every case that they look at, and they're looking at hundreds of cases, right? So I'm still holding out quite a bit of optimism that regardless of what this particular court ultimately rules, that it won't be it won't be like an attack on us or saying this is terrible what you're trying to do or a bad idea. I think it will be more along the lines of we're just a court. We're kind of scared. We don't know. We don't want to open this box because we're not sure where it's going to go.
And I think we have just a couple more minutes. So I have a question, probably for Courtney. Hold on, where did it go? Oh, Anne. So Anne asks, what are some of the legislative projects that we have going on or will have going on in the new year?
So we are continuing to work on local legislation in California, in the city of Los Angeles, and we're looking at other cities to move into. Obviously, it's a little difficult now given the restrictions with COVID. I'm based in California and we have a very tight lockdown, so it's a little more challenging, but we're still pushing through. We're working on some work at the federal level and talking to lawmakers in Congress. We are working with state legislators in Connecticut, where our client Minnie is currently imprisoned. And we're looking at other places we can work in 2021. And there was also something really exciting that happened in Canada. I think it was last week or a week ago. They introduced the Jane Goodall Act, and Jane Goodall is a founding board member of the Non-Human Rights Project. And in the preamble for the proposed act, which would ban the keeping of many non-human animals in captivity, they talked about our work, which was really exciting. So we're hoping to be able to assist in that work as it moves through Parliament. So there's a lot that we're looking at what we can do in 2021 and projects that we have that we're working on currently.
Mickey,
Yeah,
are you there?
I am.
Hi, could I see two questions? Could I just answer them? Because I think
Yes, absolutely.
one of them said that do you think Happy would care what reward it would give the zoo? It's her freedom, and does this not make her into a bargaining chip on your part? We actually we never exploit our clients ever, when we take on a non-human animal client, we treat them as if we took on a human client. We do everything we can to possibly set them free. We ask at the very beginning. We demand their freedom. We want them freed. And if the price of that is dismissing our case and not being able to try to set a precedent, then we unhesitatingly would do that. What we were saying before is what we won't do is buy our client. That's another issue. Other people might, but we're not going to buy our client any more than we'd try to buy our human client. And the other thing is, someone asked us about Corky. You're involved in a similar situation with Corky, who's an orca who's at SeaWorld. We didn't mention we've been looking to sue SeaWorld for years, and we have not, because there's been no sanctuary. There's no place to put an orca if we win. That's changing, and we think within the next 2 years there will be at least one sanctuary, maybe more, maybe two, up and running. And at that point, we're already working on a lawsuit against SeaWorld. We've been working on one for years, but there's no use in filing it if there's no place to put an orca. Once we understand and we're persuaded that there is going to be a place to put an orca, then we'll probably file our lawsuit against SeaWorld.
Great. Thank you, Steve. So I think we're just about out of time. So I want to thank everyone for joining us. And do any of you have any final last things, final words?
Well, I just thank you for everybody for tuning in, and just one more pitch for anyone who is able to support us today, this Giving Tuesday. Please do go to the website, nonhumanrights.org/donate, or you can text nonhuman to just one word, nonhuman, to the number 44321.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you very much.